The University of Johannesburg has launched a relief fund to assist the KwaZulu-Natal communities affected by the flooding, with the hopes of these communities being able to use the money to rebuild and recover from the damage caused. The university is also calling on those who can voluntarily lend a hand to rebuild KwaZulu-Natal. Joining us to speak about their efforts is UJ Vice-Chancellor, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. Professor, very good evening. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Now, they do say that many hands make light work, and between you and the chair of the UJ Council, you have donated 120,000 rand.
No, absolutely. I think it is important that all of us must contribute to rebuilding KwaZulu-Natal. The effect of climate change are going to result with more frequent flooding, and unless we can collectively pull together, we are going to lose this battle. It is important to understand that when we go forward, we need to protect our cities from littering, because many of these litters that lie on our streets end up in our drainage system, and whenever you have rains and floods like this, then the situation is exacerbated. So it is very important for us to keep our cities clean if we are going to be able to handle this issue going into the future.
Professor, I've listened to many people speak about cleanliness and certainly the possibility that blocked drainage has contributed to the flooding in KZN. But when you look at the rivers that have been created in the middle of streets and households and the entire degradation, if you call it, that has occurred, how much of it can you actually attribute to blocked drains as opposed to just a freak of nature, if you will?
Well, I think the big issue, the big elephant in the room is actually climate change. And what we are seeing is that the frequency of floods is actually increasing, So that is the big thing. So what we need to do is that the infrastructure that we have to mitigate against that must be able to sustain this, So that is a secondary issue that needs to be handled, We cannot control, we can control what happens in climate change by responsible consumption and production, but certainly we can also mitigate against the effect when the floods happen by making sure that nobody actually builds on flood lines. Very important. Many of the Coast Quarter camps are actually being built on flood lines. Normally, the process is that you can't build on 100-year, less than 100-year, more than 100-year flood lines, and this is actually not being done. And another thing that needs to be done is that, given the fact that climate change is here, then we need to relook at the new flood lines so that when people build, we are able to advise where the rivers, the next rivers that are going to come as a result of flooding are going to happen.
Now, just one more question, certainly on this and climate change, because I would like to focus on the pledges that you've made and the work that the UJ is doing to assist the people of KZN. But let's talk a little about, do we have the expertise and the understanding of how to deal with the issues around flooding, particularly in KZN. In a report we had earlier on, we spoke about the frequency of floods in the KZN. I think in the last 5 or so years, this is the third time that we've experienced flooding that has caused some measure of destruction.
Absolutely. If you look at the number of people, the amount of research that is going on modeling of climate change, of modeling of future flooding, we do have expertise. I think what we ought to do is to make sure that this expertise are appropriately deployed. One of the things that we suffer from is that we do not have an effective way of deploying the right people to the right jobs, and some people will call that corruption, and there's an element of that, I think going forward we need to support institutions such as the University of Johannesburg that are studying this phenomena and making sure that the students who are coming out of those programs are appropriately deployed, especially in our local and provincial governments.
Okay, Professor, now let's go back to the pledge and certainly the fundraising that you are carrying out. Talk to us about how this fund will be managed.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we obviously are quite worried about, well, we were quite worried about, is who do you give these funds to? Because we also would not want the funds to be misappropriated, and we have decided that the funds are going to be given to the gifts of the givers, trusted NGO that has worked with us, whether it is on the feeding scheme or on campus. That is very important. The second part is all of us must come together, certainly as the UJ community. The Chair of Council, Mr. Mike Teke, has actually led this drive, and he was the initiator of this drive. And I have come to the party, and many staff at the University of Johannesburg are coming to the party, and we are expecting that in the next few days, the amount that is going to be handed over will be in millions, so that we can be able to do this. It is important to understand that problems such as this require all of us. We must develop a culture of giving, because it is through giving that we are going to tackle some of the problems that we are actually facing. They say people who give become more responsible for their environments, and it is important as we go forward and protect our environment from future flooding that we have people who are responsible, and let us do it.
Now, Professor, over the last few days, we've been covering all that's been happening in KZN, and amongst what we've covered certainly are individuals who've lost their loved ones. One young man lost 3 family members, another lost 4, and President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about a family where 10 people perished in the flooding. So psychosocial support is obviously going to be key. And when you talk about let's all come together, you talk about the UJ community, are there efforts or is there a plan to be able to support people? Because the amount of mental stress, if you will, is going to be massive.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the help that is needed is really multi-pronged. Food, just foods that need to be delivered. Issues of clothes that people will need in order for them to, to continue with their lives. Issues of psychological help. How do we counsel these people who have lost their lives, lost their loved ones as well as their assets? Many of them have lost their assets. How do we rebuild schools that have been disrupted by this tragedy? So there are many things. That is why it is important that this be managed well, because if we do not put the right people in the right positions to manage this disaster, then we are not going to be able to do it effectively. So we need experts here to know what needs to be done, where should we deploy our help so that the impact is actually maximized. And I understand I was listening to the Motsepe Foundation also donating that the faith-based community are also involved, and it's very important because this is a very important pillar of our society, and many of our people belong to many of these faith, so it requires all of us. But the professional help is very important. Psychologists, people who understand distribution systems of distributions of food, people who understand, who are able to use data to be able to understand where help is needed the most, helping people recover their loved ones. Some of the loved ones have not yet been found. All this require professional intervention.
Now, how can those that are looking to support this initiative via the UJ reach you?
We certainly have a UJ website where you can actually be able to donate. I am going to send that website to you after this, to the person who has contacted me, and then it is managed by the university. It's not managed by individuals, it's managed by the university. And we really are calling upon, especially our alumni, our students, our staff members, and our broader community to be involved, because we really want to make sure that this is the disaster that we have to handle well. We cannot afford to fail.
Now, Professor, if my research serves me correct, you're a mechanical engineer.
Absolutely. I am a mechanical engineer with a PhD in artificial intelligence, and I have worked quite extensively on modeling of complex systems. I have actually written a book on modeling of complex systems, and issues such as infrastructure is one of the things that I have been involved in, especially smart infrastructure that is able to sustain.
Excellent, disaster. Professor. If you'll ask me to then just go on and ask my question around that, and that is the reconstruction of the roads and infrastructure in KZN. I mean, the devastation is absolutely remarkable by any standard. What are the processes of rebuilding KZN to where it was? What sort of timelines are we looking at? And what can be done to prevent future disasters?
No, absolutely. I think firstly, we need to get the professionals. We need to get the professional engineers, whether they are civil, whether they are mechanical, whether they are electrical, because those infrastructures have been devastated. And this morning I was talking to the president of the Engineering Council of South Africa, Mrs. Refile Buthelezi, and she is going to be mobilizing that community to be involved. Secondly, we need to make sure that the companies that are involved in this reconstruction are tried and tested, so that we do not have suboptimal solutions that are going to cause future disasters in the future. We actually need to ensure that our infrastructure is robust going forward. And I have already mentioned this, that once you litter, that litter ends up in our drainage system. And if it is not supposed to be there, it blocks the drainage system. And when it happens, the water that is supposed to go through our drainage system ultimately does not do so. It remains on the surface, and ultimately you see rivers in our streets. We really need to take this issue very, very seriously. Maintenance. Our infrastructure must be maintained, whether it is our drainage system, whether it is our water system. Very, very important to do that in the future. We also need to ensure that when people are looking for places to stay, and especially informal settlements, you have something called floodlines. These are places that the people who are experts in this field have identified as a risk of flooding in the future. Many of our informal settlements are sitting on floodlines. You just have to drive through the highway in Durban, and you will see some of these informal settlements on steep slope next to highways. And you can ask yourself, what happens when there's flooding? Obviously, it is going to be flooded, and many of those infrastructure are going to be swept into the highways. So it's very, very important that we certainly have to do our part to formalize things and to make sure that we understand where the dangers are, the skills are there, and ensure that we protect our people.
Now, Professor, you've called on volunteers, you've called on certainly members of your alumni to support this cause, which obviously is fundraising. But let's talk a little bit about, as a final question, rebuilding KZN. Now, COVID-19 has cost the country billions of rand. The Rights in 2021 did a similar thing. I don't think South Africa can afford this bill, if you will, without some form of charity. And this charity coming from South African citizens, South African organizations coming together and saying, we would like to give a portion of the services that are required at no cost. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually think South Africa is a country that can be able to handle this. You know, I'm absolutely convinced that if we have efficient systems that is free of corruption, of directing help into rebuilding KZN, we can be able to afford it. But the donation is important because more is needed. That one is for sure. So now, what needs to be done? You know, I actually think that we need to professionalize the help that needs to be deployed. Very, very important. And by the way, this rebuilding is actually an investment. People must understand that. KZN is a very important economic node of our country. If things are not rebuilt very soon in Gauteng, the supply of oil becomes compromised. That part of our country has important depots, and so it's very important in the movement of goods in South Africa. So this is not really charity. This is really an investment that we all have to make, so that our supply of food, our supply of fuel, our supply of machinery that comes through the depots and ports in Durban are actually not disrupted.
Professor Tshilidzi, UJ, Vice-Chancellor, we thank you for your time this evening, and he was unpacking for us certainly some of the challenges that have befallen KZN, speaking about the contribution that the University of Johannesburg Council is making towards supporting it.